Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this evening's program. My name is Amanda Bradley, and I am the program's manager here at Oolite Arts. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the lands and waters now known as the state of Florida, the ancestral homelands of the Calusa, Tequesta, Maya-Imi, and many other tribes who were decimated by colonization. Today, Miami and the greater Everglades are unceded ancestral homeland cared for by the descendants of peoples that came to be known as the Seminole Tribe of Florida and the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida and the independent Miccosukee Seminole. Tonight, I'm excited to be joined by artist Sasha Wortzel and curator Wortzel Kennedy, who will be talking about the imagining, planning, and production of the exhibition Dreams of Unknown Islands amidst a global lockdown. Together, through many virtual conversations over the course of 10 months, the exhibition came to life, creating a space flooded with possibility and hope for an uncertain future. In the exhibition, subjects of ecological precarity, temporality, memory, loss, and the transformative power of collective mourning are explored through sculpture, sound, film, and installation. But before we get started, I want to encourage everyone to submit any questions you have through the chat. We'll be selecting and reading out your questions during the Q&A toward the end of the conversation. Following the conversation, we will be screening a film that Oolite Arts created on Sasha and her work, so be sure to stay tuned. I'm going to read a little bit about each of our speakers, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Born and raised in Southwest Florida, Sasha Wortzel is an artist and filmmaker working between Miami and New York City. Blending the archival and the imaginary, her films, installations, and performances map the ways that structures of power haunt and inextricably shape our contemporary landscape. Wortzel's work has been shown at the Museum of Modern Art, New Museum, The Kitchen, True False Film Festival, and Berlinale. Wortzel's films are distributed by Frameline and Field of Vision, and their work is in the permanent collections of the Brooklyn Museum and Leslie Lohan Museum of Art. She has been featured in publications including the New York Times, Art Forum, Art in America, and New York Magazine. Wortzel Kennedy is an accomplished curator, artist, and educator. She is the artistic director and curator of visual art at the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, PICA. She manages and directs PICA's year-round exhibition program, where she focuses on the commissioning and development of large-scale projects with artists that exist at the borders of genres. Her work has been exhibited internationally and is represented by 1430 Contemporary Art in Portland, Oregon. Kennedy teaches contemporary art history at Pacific Northwest College of Art in their MFA Visual Studies program, and formally at Portland State University for the BFA and MFA Studio Practice program and the Social Practice MFA program. She is a member of the board at the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. She has published several essays on artist work, curatorial practice, and ethics in journals and for exhibitions nationally. Sasha, Kristan, welcome.
Hi, Sasha. It's so good to be with you here.
Hey.
After a long year of seeing each other across digital means. We were, for those of you who don't know, we were matched by Oolite right as the world was sort of acknowledging we were heading into a pandemic. And both of us were like on sort of navigating wiggly territory in our own lives, our professional lives, our personal lives, and started to talk about what it meant to make an exhibition during this time and what Sasha might want to see come to life. And I just want to acknowledge and thank all of the Oolite staff in front of the scenes, behind the scenes, who have helped make this exhibition and project come together, because normally I would be on the ground there working with Sasha directly, but so many different hands there in Miami had to help make this exhibition with you while I was in Portland. So I'm really appreciative of all the care that they showed to you and your work and your ideas. So thank you to Oolite. Sasha, we're looking at the sort of entrance to your exhibition. There's this sort of minimal field of view in front of us. Your shell sculptures are hanging overhead. there's a sculpture in the distance. But the one thing that's missing from this picture is for the viewers is that the exhibition space is filled with a sound piece, and I would say it's it's a major work in the exhibition. I'm wondering if you could talk, briefly about that piece, which centers itself around the mourners Kaddish and a community of people that you invited to perform it with you. And then maybe we could listen, all of those of you who are with us today could listen to that piece just for a minute so we could get ourselves into the tone and tenor of the exhibition.
Yeah, thank you, Kristan. And also thank you so much to Oolite. So much care and support. I'll give a brief description and maybe we can dig into a little bit more about the piece. But it's true that I think one of the central works that the space itself is actually quite maybe like there's not a lot in it. What fills the space are the sounds. And so when you walk in, what you're hearing is a mix of recordings that were made underwater along Florida's coastline, right along that kind of liminal space where water meets land. And then that's been woven together with the sounds of friends and other artists and poets that I invited to take the mourner's Kaddish, a Jewish mourner's prayer, and make it their own. And I had them do that and send the sounds back to me. So what you're hearing are these sort of manipulated and abstracted voices mixed with those sounds of the water.
Maybe we should go to that sound clip now.
Kaddish. I think, a lot of these, so my work off image and in film, and prior to developing this exhibition, I was really immersed in working on a longer form feature, kind of experimental documentary that deals with the sort of past, present, and very precarious future of the Everglades, of this very iconic but also imperiled region that is unlike any other on the earth, but on the verge of collapse. And of course, that's where Miami is. That's where this show is. That's where you find Miami Beach. And for me, that project, and this work, Dreams of Unknown Islands, grows out of that. And I was thinking a lot about, what does it mean as somebody who is from South Florida? What does it mean to be from a place that in my lifetime may cease to exist, or already is looking radically different? Who is feeling the effects of that first? Why is that happening? How did we come to be here? And trying to grapple with home in this fairly complex settler colonial landscape. So mourning. So this idea of maybe anticipatory mourning and processing something that is already unfolding, but that we're anticipating is coming, but we're already seeing the effects. And I was really looking for ways to process this. And I found myself turning to and thinking about what rituals of mourning I had already inherited from my Jewish ancestors. It was kind of like, wait a minute, I come from a long line of people from generations who have been grappling with living in a precarious, space, with loss, with mourning, and also with resistance and thinking about collective care. And so I started to think about how maybe the mourner's Kaddish, this prayer that is said when a loved one passes on in community, it's meant to be said in a group of people and is understood as a collective process, the process of mourning. How could that maybe be a framework for thinking through some of these ideas? And then, of course, at first I was thinking a lot about ecological precarity, but also what that's entangled with, but then, of course, the pandemic happened. But I'm sort of getting far off from the topic of the title, but to say Dreams of Unknown Islands also comes from a book that was written in the 1940s by Marjorie Stoneman Douglas that has been kind of the departure point for a lot of the work I've been doing recently in this film. And in the book, it's one of the first texts that sort of thoroughly chronicles both the cultural, geological, and environmental history of this region. And she writes of Dreams of Unknown Islands as these sort of almost fever dreams that European colonizers are having of this world, that of these islands that they could go to, where they could find wealth, resources, what could be extracted. So I was really interested in that, but also in the way in which Dreams of Unknown Islands also implies past, but it also implies future of an unknown and dreams. So I liked that I'm trying to get at this idea of both how do we acknowledge the legacies of colonization, of these kind of harmful systems that have shaped the present moment, while also aspiring towards having utopian aspirations, and maybe not utopian in everything's perfect kind of sense, but what do we want to be unmaking, and what new worlds or islands do we want to be building here together? Is what I'm thinking about. And I'm interested in that a lot. And that's a tension that I think is showing up in the show.
Yeah, I'm remembering back to our very first conversations, and you used the word ideas. I think this is a show of ideas that were kind of moving around in your head. You were thinking about testing this idea of these speakers, of testing the idea of making this sound piece. And through the exhibition, they were able to be manifested. I wonder if you could talk about some of the decisions along the way, like the kind of shape and design of the speakers that you made, which references, a shell, but also some of the decisions to use abstraction and to obfuscate, your friends' voices, your community's voices, and to even create a space in the films that are shown in which color and pacing and everything lead to sort of another version of something, a stand-in for something that exists in real life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can start with the sound, some of the decisions around the sound and the actual objects that the sound is emitted from, since that's something you first asked. I relocated back to Florida in 2019. And one of the first, I think like the first day that I was here, I took a walk on the beach, and it was in the summer during hurricane season. It was really like moody, and the skies were super gray, and there'd just been like a big thunderstorm, and a lot of stuff had washed up on the beach. And one of the first things what I found was this like very sponge eaten large horse conch, which I later learned is Florida's state shell. I don't know, we might be the only state in the country that has an official state shell, but there was something really, so of course, I was looking at this sort of like this thing, this weathered sort of object, it seemed like this artifact that was like traversing time, traversing water and land, but also was thinking a lot about the folk myth, that many of us are familiar with, that if you put a seashell to your ear, you're immediately transported to the ocean, or the ocean is transported to you. But in essence, because of the spiral shape of the seashell, it creates this, it's a natural amplifier. And what you're hearing, and you write so beautifully about this, Kristan, in the essay that you wrote for the show, is you're really hearing the blood rushing through your body. And so it's this moment where you're sort of external and internal are kind of colliding, the corporeal, your body, and land and water are colliding. And I'm just really interested in thinking about, what a more expansive we could be, or what if we thought of family, kinship, and the collective as not just humans, but also plants, animals, the spirit world, the dead. So that was kind of the inspiration to create these objects, which are these sort of angular, abstracted conch shells that have many edges and sides, and they, I think, when you look at them, they shift, as you move around them in the space, they're hard to pin down. They have many angles, many faces. And that's something I was interested in as well. And so they're outfitted with some hardware that turns them, in essence, into amplifiers, which is already what seashells do. And the sounds are emitted by them and sort of course through the space. It's 7 channels. And so the audio you heard was stereo over your computer, your headphones. But when you're in the space, it's sort of shifting and sneaking around through the shell. So it's creating kind of a spatial effect where you hear water rushing around you. You hear these voices moving around you. I know you had many more questions, but yeah.
No, you got it. I was struck by, when I was listening to it, this idea of being underwater. Having this collection of underwater sounds, but also the voices or the people, being underwater, like somehow protected, but also, submerged. And it's this really beautiful piece. And I can imagine being in the space and having it surround you. And, it's almost criminal to look at the objects without the sound, right? Because they're so linked together. I'm wondering if we could flip to the next slide. Things kept happening while you were making this exhibition that were little signposts that maybe you were on to something or communicating with, another world. But during the making of the exhibition, a couple of different articles we'll talk about came out in the New York Times, and one came out about this seashell that was found in the Pyrenees, actually in the 30s, and had sat there kind of untouched, just as like an example of a seashell, for many, many, many years. And then through technology, scientists were able to look at the shell a little more closely and discovered it was an instrument. And one of the things that they also tried to play it, right? They tried to hear what the sound was inside of it. And one of the things that the person who tried to play it said was, I need a lot of air to maintain the sound. And I kept thinking how like poetic that was in terms of us living at a time of great mourning, mass death, police violence, ecological destruction, the pandemic, that are all interrelated and connected. And talking about this like need for air to keep things going, the need for air for us to exist. There's something really eerie about listening to this sound in concert with your own. And we have a clip of it. It's just a few seconds, and I wonder if we could listen to it. Could you talk about how this sort of simultaneity, if at all, influenced you or pushed you forward? And I guess also I'm thinking about all of the different conflated ideas and different meanings that are living in your work. You know, you're active as an activist. You're talking about like ecology, humanity, and art simultaneously. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the space that all of these ideas live together and how you sort of compress them in your films and in this work.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know where to start. I think that one thing I'm trying to do with the show, and that's something we talked about, is kind of build a container for many griefs, that there's not just one grief that we're experiencing, there are many, right? And how we, during the making of this work in 2020, of course, we're experiencing a global pandemic, ongoing police violence, systemic racism, ecological collapse, ongoing resource extraction, and how all those things are really entangled. They're not separate, right? And that we saw in many ways that the pandemic itself is rooted in a kind of ongoing death and destruction. And I think, I think that I was already trying to create something that could hold these complexities. I'm interested in how do we come together to collectively unmake a world that is already unraveling or desperately trying to not unravel, right? In order to build something new. And how these great moments of upheaval and transition, how can those be these sort of portals towards transformation, towards healing, and that is also not happening because of any one individual or one action, right? It's an ongoing collection of many people, of many moments that makes transformation happen. I think I've sort of lost my train of thought of some of your questions, but I think that was one of the starting points of the show, is how to hold those many things and how to move towards healing, move towards acknowledgement, reconciliation, to building something new without denying the very harmful systems that are still with us, shaping this present moment, and the very real struggles that are still ahead of us.
Yeah. But I think amongst all of that, the feelings and the information that you were processing, you were making this larger film that's still in production. And then there's all of these little nodes within this exhibition, almost like footnotes to your experience during that making. And one of the things we talked about quite a bit was this notion of peace, and how to find peace at this time, or something that is grounding. And you were telling me about how you had started during the pandemic going out and live streaming the sunset, to Instagram, just your own, sort of friend circle. I'm wondering if you could talk about that process, and then how that led to these videos that are included in the exhibition, which we'll watch while we're talking, both of a sunset and sunrise, which is a kind of weirded clock that just keeps running in the exhibition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, weirded clock. Yeah, I think like many of us, one of the things that there was, I think, when the pandemic started unfolding and we weren't able to gather, many of us felt like maybe we were living in our own islands, even more so, and felt a sense of like separation, but also at the same time, I think it exposed how deeply entangled we all are, that we're not separate. But one of the things, I've started to do, and I found a lot of peace in it, is in the total like disorientation around time and the kind of mixed upness of place. I found it really grounding and I think many of us did, to kind of turn even more deeply to the natural world and to observe what's happening around us. And, beyond doing kind of just basically trying to take care of myself. One of the things that I'd make myself do daily was to go watch the sunset. And I think for me, in some ways, it was kind of like a form of sitting Shiva. It was like a moment to breathe, to reflect, to meditate, to process the day that had just passed, to ground into a time, but maybe a different sense of time, and to feel connected, knowing that we're anywhere we are, whether you can see, I was very lucky to see this perfect sun descending below the horizon line, which you're looking at currently, but wherever we are, the light's shifting, there's a transition taking place. And again, I think one of the many ideas or nodes in the show is about these in-between spaces, these slippery moments, these moments of transition and what's possible there. And there was even something with the quality of light, the light, that sort of being bathed in that kind of golden hour light that happens when the sun sets or when the sun rises, I think has an effect on us, that allows us to feel some sense of possibility, in a time where, things feel pretty rough.
Yeah. And then as part of the engagement with the show, you decided to invite different friends and colleagues of yours to contribute their sort of viewscapes at sunset and commentary until the end of the run of the show. And I'm wondering if you're often collaborating. I mean, filmmaking is a collaborative process just inherently. Mm-hmm. And you had many collaborators on this exhibition who are working in sound, who are helping you construct objects and fabricate work. But in this case, I'm wondering if you could talk about authorship. And in a lot of times in collaboration, there's sort of this absorbed authorship where you become like one entity or collaborative. And I think you're really interested in, specificity in naming, in acknowledgement, individual collaborators and what they contribute. And I'm wondering if you could talk about, how you lean into collaboration and some of the ethics behind it.
Yeah. I think, as I was saying earlier, maybe one of the things in the show that I'm exploring is this way in which, and this kind of moves throughout my practice, is how this idea of the individual is kind of a myth, right? We are the product of, and are constantly being made by our families, by the communities we're embedded in, by the kinship networks that support us and make our lives possible, make our work possible. And so I think that, in my work, I'm really invested in thinking about and also how to transform systems of oppression through art. And the way that I think a lot of social transformation and social movements happen is, again, I think I said this earlier, it's a collection of people, it's a collection of moments that's really ongoing that makes change happen. And so I'm interested in also bringing that kind of way of working in community organizing and social movements into my art practice. And I think we're stronger when we work together. There's a saying in the disability justice movement that, we're stronger when we move together with nobody left behind. And so I think I'm really interested in bringing in as many people into the process. And with the sunsets, I think it was also about really bringing in people who are also thinking about in really intimate and nuanced ways about their relationship to place and to land in other places outside of Florida, that the things that I'm sort of mining around the histories and the present what's unfolding in Miami Beach or in Florida or in the Everglades is also intimately connected to what's happening, out in the Mojave Valley or, in Western Massachusetts where the land is covered in snow, or on a Brooklyn rooftop. But all these things are connected.
We're in Portland, where during our time making the exhibition, we were on fire out here on the West Coast,
Right, of course.
I wonder if we could advance the slide and kind of move forward to talk about this piece, Sitting Shiva, and the chairs, the construction, and moreover, the material of the chairs, which is they're made of aluminum frame, but also the skins of Burmese pythons, which you were the one to inform me are an invasive species in the Everglades and causing a lot of havoc. But you also kind of honed in on something you had been talking to a friend about in terms of like, what is an invasive species and how do we treat an invasive, what we call an invasive species that, I wonder if you could speak about that.
Mm-hmm. So the chairs, first of all, they're just these very, they're the kind of chairs that so many of us are familiar with, that we see all over, people's lawns, the beach, your stoop. It's this object that brings, the maybe more domestic or, private realm into the public space. And they're so associated with leisure. And for me, when I look at those chairs, I also think a lot about my grandparents who first found leisure in South Florida, and many, many people who've passed through and found leisure. But the Burmese python, so I was thinking about those chairs and I had this vision of redoing them in python. I had been, as part of this longer film project, I'm out in the field a lot. A lot of my research is just happening in the field, and I've been going out with a few folks who are either volunteers or are contracted by the state of Florida to remove pythons. And one of the people I was filming with said something to me early on about how he thinks about how he channels kind of the negativity that's associated with the destruction of our environment, of the wilderness, into this removal process. That, like, for him, he can kind of channel that and sort of transform it by removing these things that are wreaking havoc on the environment. But I'm really interested in the way that, the python itself it's not the python's fault that they're here, that they're rapidly reproducing, that they're eating all the mammals in the Everglades, that they're moving north. We put them there. So I am interested in, the slipperiness of this term invasive. What is invasive, and how are we responsible for, how are we tied up with this snake that is wreaking havoc on our environment?
Yeah, that's directly related to accountability, because if we put this label of invasive on something, or if we think about how the country deals with immigration politics, we're able to put blame on someone who is here seeking care, and then talk about extraction. Again, another sort of happenstance during the exhibition is that another article came out that the squalene found in, which is a lipid found in Burmese python specifically, is a sought after material in COVID-19 vaccine. So suddenly this thing that is killing us can also save us, right? So how are we looking at our environment, all of our environment, and trying to really see things for what they are, or the potential that they could be, and what they're here for, and what they have to offer us. We're sort of nearing the time that we are going to run into a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat. But I'm wondering if we could advance the slide. This is a video here of a turtle laying eggs, and it's in this really beautiful, eerie, I don't know if this is just the natural light you were filming in, or if you colorized the film, but there's sort of eerie color in the whole exhibition. There's this peach color, there's the light from the sunset that is, coming out of the room. And then there's this kind of, strange blue-green scene. Could you talk about this piece and sort of just a little bit more about your choices of color in the exhibition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I spoke about there's a lot of light in the space, in the gallery space itself, but there's definitely the floor. I'll start with the floor, for instance. So the whole floor of the space is painted I think it's called flamingo pink, but for me that pink was very much is a color that is, I think, very iconic. It's very Art Deco, it's very Miami Beach. It's also a color that is often associated with a sense of leisure, with the beach, and with retirement. And for those who don't live or spend time in Miami Beach, the sidewalks are also, they're sort of a reddish color or almost a pinkish color. And when you're standing in the space, you can see the sort of pinkish sidewalk outside on Lincoln Road. You're looking out at this pedestrian mall, and I was thinking about extending that into the space. And a lot of the show is about orienting ourselves to place, to this island that we are on when you're in the space itself. And then there's playing with the sort of golden light, the light of transition time between day and night in the sunset and the sunrise videos, and also in a light and text installation. But then with this video, so this video is filmed of the sea turtle in June during the pandemic under a full moon. And the only light that was used in it was the available light of the full moon. And then also when you're filming wildlife at night, you can only use a flashlight with a red filter. So actually the footage originally was this almost like hot pink color. But I was interested in changing that to give it a different kind of quality. The sunset and the sunrise, I think, deal a lot more with like the day, and also the exhibition's open during the day. So sort of the diurnal, I guess, rhythms. And this, I wanted to have something that kind of signaled the night, the nocturnal things that happen in the dark, that there's still life taking place while we're sleeping, and what kind of labor is maybe concealed or not always as visible. So that's sort of something, and thinking again about this feeling of being underwater, of submerged, and what's beneath or below.
It's so beautiful to watch the turtle just make leave their eggs behind and kind of go into the moonlight of the water. It's such a struggle, but it also it's really beautiful. And I think that's a fitting place to end kind of our talk here, and maybe invite Amanda into the conversation to see if there's any questions.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for that insight. I do have a few questions. So one from Rebecca is, what do you imagine would be different about this exhibition had the pandemic not happened? Do you think that it would have shifted the end result?
It's an interesting question. Thank you, Rebecca, for that question. I only know life in the pandemic. I will say that I think that some of the ideas that are sort of being explored through these objects, through these sounds and the spaces, certainly predate the pandemic. However, I think that the show took on a whole new weight under the circumstances that it was being produced. And I think ultimately, I hope that one takeaway is that, things were not okay prior, and they're still not okay. And so what do we need to do to kind of to repair this, and to really center care and take care of each other, and not just each other, but the land we're on, the other life that are here? How can we be more in balance with it? So I don't know. I think it's a great question, but I can't imagine a world outside of the pandemic anymore.
One way I could imagine it shifting is just this space created a lot of room for people to come and have like private interactions with the sound. And I can imagine it would be different the work might have been the same, but it could have been different in a full gallery, what it meant to have like many bodies in the space together, but also perhaps some of the collaborations that you were doing would have been live. And I could see the space like activated by bodies, because you find yourself you intersect with so many different communities that you kept wanting to bring into the exhibition in some way. And you did that through sound, through the seven sunsets, through the conversations in the show. But that's kind of one way I could see it shifting. But I would say, I would also echo that at the beginning of the conversation, Sasha already had these ideas worked out and was in residence at Oolite working on this. We couldn't have known that we were going to be thrown into this precarity, this much precarity.
Well, that leads me to my next question, which is for you, Kristan. What challenges did you face while trying to curate this solely through a virtual space?
I think this show is so much about place. And although I have my own personal experience with Florida, because I grew up in Brooklyn and all of my relatives migrated and live in Florida now, and I spent time there as a child, I really wanted to experience South Florida and Florida through Sasha's eyes, and to kind of put the work and the place together in my mind. And so I definitely missed that. And now I have this longing to come be there and to see the Everglades, which I've never seen with Sasha, and kind of understand what is happening there in a deeper way. But I will say that there were also, and then I think there were just the personal challenges of like both Sasha and I experiencing like every emotion you could imagine, malaise, complications with our like just survival. And I work in another institution, so I was also trying to help that organization survive and pay artists and, move through all of those things. But I think in terms of our communication, I'm really grateful for Sasha's like virtual companionship over a year, and for our conversations that were so bracingly honest and allowed like the personal and the professional to blend, so that we could arrive at like figuring out the best way to support her work at this time. I would say that I did very little curating, whatever, in the respect that I wasn't cherry picking objects of Sasha's to put in an exhibition. But I think many people have heard before that the origin of the word curate is to care for. And so in that respect, I feel like we really cared about the ideas in this exhibition and each other. And it was a real pleasure and not a burden to work on the show during this time.
And I think the pandemic allowed us to come together in a just much more open and vulnerable way. It just sort of demanded it. And I think that, it just created, I'm also just so grateful to Kristan. Like the conversations we've had in this project have been really like a bright spot and sort of something that's sort of grounded me throughout the year. And I do think that I will say, yes, I think the pandemic did impact maybe also sort of the production of the work. The timeline that it happened, for a long time, things stopped. Even the lab that I was working with through Oolite to produce the sculptures, they shut down and were only producing PPE, as they should be. So there were just a lot of unknowns, but I do think that the pandemic forced us to sort of spend more time with the ideas and to sit and to reflect and to breathe, and allowed me, I think, to get a little bit more in touch with what the intentions of the show were and what I wanted to be offering people in this moment. And I'm not sure I would have been able to do that and have those conversations with Kristan if it had been pre-pandemic. And I think, Kristan, you really, as a curator, really gave me, I think, permission to really experiment, to put things out that maybe aren't always fully finished, to leave things open, to let meaning emerge. And that was one of the beautiful things about working with you, was that kind of permission that you gave me to experiment with the space.
Well, I'm pretty committed to that mandate in all of the exhibitions that I make with all the artists I work with. But I think even more so now, the kind of idea that something has to be perfect or complete is not helpful. Like, we have to be able to interact with ideas as they're being made. And I think Sasha you probably won't know how you feel about this work until a few years down the line. And so the acknowledgement that things take longer to settle in should allow you to like let things go a little bit easier. And I was also conscious that you're working on this like big other project, this film, and how those two things interacted was really important, you know.
Well, I have two more questions. And I guess this question could kind of go for both of you because, Kristan, you are also artist and curator. What artists are you inspired by right now, or who are you looking at? I know, Sasha, this exhibition really came out of the time that you were in. And one of the great, experiences that I had working with you on the show was seeing you translate some of the things you think about in filmmaking into a physical form. So I wonder if during this exhibition, you started to look at other people who were making work, either responding to the times that we were in or working in these different forms that you were discovering.
I mean, I think some of the, I think a lot of the artists that are inspiring me right now, or that I'm looking to, are many of the artists that I'm in community with, and that I sort of pulled into the show, whether they were, reciting or reimagining a mourner's cottage or broadcasting a sunset. There are also, I worked with incredible people to realize the sound installation, including Denise Faxas, who's, teching this event right now, who's also a musician making music that inspires me, or Emily Milgram, who helped with the sound design. I would encourage you to please look at the 7 Sunsets and look at those artists that I've invited in: Soretta Morgan, Tourmaline, Adie Roberson, Sasha Yano. I apologize if I'm leaving anybody out of that, but I think those are many of the artists that are inspiring me, but also they're kind of like, they're keeping me alive in many ways, because that's my community. And so, yeah, I want to lift up those people.
Well, it's a complicated question to answer, because I think, I'm looking at so much work all the time by various artists, and I hold so many artists like in this container in my mind that are friends and colleagues, and also artists that I get to work with through my work at PICA. But I'll say that I just this morning was watching a really short promo video for William Popel's exhibition that's about to open at Mitchell Innes Nash. And I'm always continually inspired by Popel's work and way in the world, and his use of like charm and language and subversion and rhetoric in order to get really complicated ideas out in the public. Mm-hmm. I saw a really incredible performance by an artist named Javad Alipour at the Under the Radar Festival in New York. And I think it's still going to be presented. PICA will eventually present it. But it was the sort of the first piece that I saw that really used like the format of being online at a virtual performance really, really well. It was like you were working on your phone during it, you were scrolling, you were watching the screen, but it also was about like sort of like global issues of ecology and commerce and commodity. So it was a really profound piece. I just saw a great piece by Mariana Valencia, who's another performance artist out of New York. And while this exhibition was going on, I was mounting an exhibition with my co-curator, Ruya Amir Soleimani, by an artist named Carlos Mota, which featured 3 other artists inside of it, and dealt with ideas of undocumented life, especially experienced by queer artists. And that was really like a really beautiful exhibition that still stays with me, and you can watch all of the videos from that show online now. So those are just a few things that come to mind.
Great. And then lastly, before we go into the short film, Sasha, what is next for you?
Well, I have a film to finish. So yeah, next is, I think there's still a lot of ideas that I want to keep developing that have surfaced through this exhibition, and to continue kind of experimenting with, starting in moving image and then moving out to building out into objects. But yeah, so I'll be editing and finishing a feature documentary called River of Grass. That's one of the big things I'm focusing on right now.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. And thank you, Kristan and Sasha, for sharing so much insight into how this show really came to life.